I'm so excited. This is the third time I've been invited to help Michelle Lupton kick off her annual Case Me a Christmas card feature. This is one of my favorite card making events of the year. I love working with Michelle, I love Christmas, and it's this event that helped me develop my LIMES acronym, which helps you translate inspiration into something that's completely your own. Let me show you how it works. LIMES stands for List, Include, Modify, Exclude, and Spin. Let's start by looking at Michelle's pretty card and listing all the inspiration here. I generally start by listing the colors, and Michelle has some pretty pinks and purples with white and black. For techniques, I've read Michelle's blog description, so I know that she die cut and ink blended the flowers, and the background and sentiment are printed papers. For elements, she has vertical strip down the center with white edges. It has a textured watercolored look along with some text. There are 3 die-cut layered flowers with ink-blended edges and a black horizontal sentiment with white lettering. For my first card, I started off by masking an A2 size card panel with 2 pieces of 1-inch mint tape right on each edge. This is the easiest way I know to make sure that the 2 masked off strips are equal and straight. I pulled out my Waffle flower stencil mat. I like this surface for ink blending. It's grippy and smooth, so my brushes don't usually lift up the edges of the cardstock, and it's easy to clean. I blended some blotchy Rockin red in a couple of spots, and then I moved on to pucker up to fill the rest in. I'm not too worried about getting a smooth blend right now, because these inks smooth out quite a bit as they dry, and I'll also be coming back in with some more layers of ink in a minute. I just want full coverage at this point. I've got the layered Poinsettia stencil here from Waffle flower. I love the artistic look of these poinsettias, and I'm choosing an area where I'll get flowers right down that ink-blended portion of my panel. Next, I went over the poinsettias with some Cranberry Fizz ink. This is a darker red than the Rockin red I used on the background, and it'll help to make the flowers stand out. I also blended some Glam ink on the edges of the petals. Anytime you can use more than one color on a stencil, you'll get more dimension and visual interest. Next, I put the second layer of the stencil down. I filled it around just a little bit to get it lined up where it's supposed to go, based on that first layer design. This one has the greenery and the flower centers, along with some little snowflake star kind of things, but I really just wanted to add some more leaves or petals, so I worked one by one, masking off the other elements around each one and filling it in with the Cranberry Fizz and Glam inks. For all my stenciling, I used smaller blending brushes to give me better control over the blending of the 2 colors. Earlier, for that larger background, I used larger brushes to get faster coverage. This is looking pretty, but I want to add some watery texture like Michelle's card had. So I grabbed my water sprayer and I dipped a paintbrush in, and then I tapped the water off it all over the ink blending and stenciling. You could spritz the water directly or even tap the water off the tube of the bottle's nozzle. I think I was thinking this would give me smaller droplets, and I'm not sure if that's even true or not. Then to add some festive shimmer, I added some water to a gold watercolor pan, and I used my brush to splatter that all over the panel before finally removing the mint tape from the edges of the panel. For my sentiment, I grabbed a new addition to my craft room. This is a storage box from scrapbook.com with some small plastic pouches in it. This is where I'm keeping all my extra die-cut sentiments. I have each pouch labeled with the manufacturer and die set name. I made a video not too long ago about how I'm storing my word dies on a magnetic board above my die cutter, and that I'm trying to remember to use any die cutting opportunity to create some extra die cut sentiments for future cards. I'll link that below if you're interested. I find it so helpful to be able to quickly grab a sentiment and finish my card. This time I chose the Oversized Joy die set from Waffle flower. I grabbed a black shadow and a white word, and then I looked around to find the white dot for the J, but I must have lost it. No worries, I just trimmed the dot off the shadow with a pair of scissors, but you could also add a gem or a pearl if you preferred. To finish this card off, I simply popped up the sentiment on my panel, added a black frame, and put it all on a white card base. Now let's evaluate. I included Michelle's colors, pink, purple, black, and white, and I used die cutting. And I included a vertical strip down the center with white edges. I have a textured watercolored look, some flowers, and a white sentiment on a black background. I modified my flowers. They're stenciled instead of die cut, and they're random instead of 3 in a row. And I added red, which Michelle didn't have. My sentiment is not a horizontal rectangle. I excluded the text from the background, and for my spin I added some gold splatter and a black frame. Spin just means adding things that you like that weren't necessarily in the inspiration card. I used my gel press for my next card, and I started by dabbing down some red, pink, gold, and fuchsia paints on the surface before bringing them out. The pink and fuchsia have shimmer in them, and obviously so does the gold, and that will add a festive feel to my flowers. I seem to have put too much paint down, so I rolled my brayer off to the side on some scrap paper a couple of times to get down to a nice thin layer. It was a chilly day when I did this, and I wondered if temperature affects the paints or even the gel press, because I didn't remember doing anything different from the last time I used my gel press on a warmer day, but the paint seemed to stay wetter longer. Anyway, I'm digressing. I started by taking a solid print just to get some color onto my paper. And then I put some more paint down and I spread it out again to get another thin layer. This time I put down a daisy stencil onto the paint, and then I used a clean piece of paper to get the paint off from between the stencil lines. I made sure to really press down all over to try and lift as much of the paint as I could, and I created this pretty print which will be great for a spring card. I removed this stencil and then I put my solid colored piece of paper down and I let that sit for a minute. I love this method for adding subtle dimension and texture to my printed pieces, so the fact that I used a daisy stencil to make a Christmas card is going to make a little more sense in a minute. Before I was completely finished though, I could see there was still a bit of paint on the gel press, so I added some white paint to pull a final print. This helped me clean the press, but it also gave me a pretty pink background that I can use as a background for this card. In the end, this quick process gave me 3 really different but pretty panels. Now the solid reddish pinkish panel is the one I mainly want to use for today's card, and I cut 3 sets of the 2 smaller waffle flower layered poinsettia dies with my die cutting machine. See, you can't even tell that they have daisies on them now. To add more depth and definition to the poinsettia petals, I grabbed my Glam ink and a finger dauber, and I blended a little ink onto each one. These flowers are turning out to be so pretty with that shimmery paint. To assemble the card, I cut a white panel from a larger square panel using my Essential Squares dies, which cut a narrow frame. I love this look, and I used a strip of that final gel print panel that was pale pink across the whole square, kind of weaving it over and under the frame and the panel. I placed my poinsettias across the pink strip without gluing them down, just to give me a sense of where I should stamp my sentiment. I chose a Peace, Love, and Joy from another waffle flower set, and I like the idea of the 3 words kind of tying into the 3 poinsettias. I stamped them with my new Eclipse black ink from Maker Forte. I've had this for a couple of months now, and I'm starting to think it might be one of my new favorites for this year. It stamps really crisply, but it's also great for Copic coloring and blending, and I've been looking for a blendable black ink for quite a while. At first, I attached the panel directly to a white card base, and you can see how the negative frame adds interest even to a mostly white card. I glued my 3 poinsettias in place, and I'm loving how much variation there is in those shimmery, rich colors. Then for the flower centers, I dumped out my Enchanted Forest gems from Crafty Meraki. In this mix, there are some really tiny ones, which I think will be perfect on my poinsettias, but I've obviously thought they would be perfect for previous cards because it's getting harder and harder to find any of them each time. Going back, I felt like I wanted a little more definition, so I removed that whole panel from the card base, added a black panel behind to show through the negative frame, and then I popped it all back together. Okay, let's review. This time I've included the colors. I've got pink, purple, white, and black, although again, I did add some red. This time I've got 3 die-cut flowers with ink-blended edges on a pink strip. I've made this strip and flowers horizontal rather than vertical, and I just couldn't put anything over top, so I've moved my sentiment off the flowers and onto the card directly. I excluded that text element in the background again, and as my spin, I added gems and also the black negative frame, and I made the card a 4 1/4 inch square, which will fit into a standard A2 size envelope and not require any extra postage. Every year, I love how one of Michelle's cards can take me in completely different directions and inspire more than one design. I want to thank Michelle for inviting me to be part of this year's Case Me a Christmas card. Now here's a link to Michelle's video. I hope you'll head over to see how she was inspired by one of my cards. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.